Okay, today's daf is Eruvin Daf Pe'alef. Today's daf is sponsored by the Cohen, Ray, and Maybaum families in honor of the 35th yahrzeit of their father, Michael Maybaum, Michael Avraham Zerach, Zichrono Livracha, a very unique and special man who loved Torah learning and inspired his children on this path. And by Nava Levine, in memory of her spouse, Claudia Yellen, Svia Bat Leah, the Wolf, Zichrono Livracha, on her third yahrzeit, a beloved partner and mother, relative, therapist, and friend who brought love and laughter into a complicated world. And by Nina Black, in memory of her father, Sidney Black, Shlomo Nisan ben Yaakov Reuven Zichrono Livracha, his yahrzeit. He was a good, kind man who would have been so pleased that his daughter is doing Daf Yomi. At this point, I also want to mention that we're planning already the siyum. The siyum is around the corner a few weeks from now. We're doing November 21st on a Saturday night, the Hebrew siyum, and on Sunday night at 8:30 Israel time, which will be whatever time it is where you are. So at 8:30 p.m. Israel time, we're going to be doing a siyum with everybody in English, with everyone who's not the Hebrew siyum, and you're all invited to attend. You can follow on, details will be going around. It's on Facebook, Instagram, and on the Hadron groups, the WhatsApp groups. Anyway, we'll be publicizing it. Please, I hope you'll all join. Okay, this was a long Masechet, and everyone deserves a celebration for finishing it. Okay, and even those who haven't finished and who are busy catching up, you can either catch up or you can, leave a list if you want to eventually catch up when you get to the end of 7 years. If you're behind, don't ever let being behind get you down, right? Move ahead forward. You can start with the next Masechet with Psachim. If you're not going to finish, no worries. There's nobody checking exactly who did what. You're always invited to the learning, whether or not you're on time or not. Okay, we're going to start now. We'll review the Mishnah for a quick minute. I also want to review something that we did yesterday on Pam Bet. At the top of the page, there's a Mishnah, which was if we had the food for the Shituf Mufo'od and then the food dwindled and we didn't have as much as we needed, what do? I wanted to just stress that this is, or if someone new comes in and then, if you remember, we said you add food, but you have to tell him that we're adding the food. And then we said that seems to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, who says Zachin Adam Shalo B'fanav, something that's good for him you could do. You could do even if he doesn't know about it or he's not there. So we saw there was a bit of a debate about this. We're going to get back to this at the end of today's stuff. But the main thing I wanted to stress here is that when we're talking about what happens is you put food out 1 week and the food lasts for a very long time. Usually you put it out, whether it's once a year. Okay, you usually use matzah, something that will last a long time. Today we'll get into the bread issue. But the point is that we're talking not that it happened on Shabbat that the food dwindled, but before the next week, let's say. And what they're telling you is you don't have to add food necessarily, right? It depends. Depends what the situation is, whether you have to add more food or not, right? There was a machloket about whether Rabbi Yossi said, shiur Eroof, as long as you have any little bit left, you don't have to add. According to Tanna Kama, you actually need to add for the next week. So we're talking about during the week, not on Shabbat. Okay, then we had this Mishnah, which we're now going to explain not exactly the way it sounds, but I'm going to read it first the way it sounds, the simple reading that we read yesterday. You can do anything with Eruv or Shituf, chutz min mayim v'melech, other than water or salt. Why are water and salt different? Well, salt really isn't food. Water, some people say, well, first of all, it's not nutritional, even though it might be healthy for you, but there's no nutritional value to water. So maybe because of that, debate what exactly. Maybe it's just not considered food, too basic. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, ki kal hu eruv, afilu ma'afeh se'ah. Remember, he prusa. In other words, it has to be not only bread, but it has to be whole. So there's a very wide gap between the two of them. One says anything, and the other says whole loaf of bread, not just bread, but whole loaf. So we're going to talk in the Gemara, and we can see maybe there's not as big a gap as we thought between them. Tanina chadazimna. So the Gemara starts off and says, wait a minute. Doesn't this Mishnah sound familiar to you? We learned this exact Mishnah. If you remember, earlier in the Masechet, it was Kafav. It says there, if you recall there, I don't know if you remember this, but we had a whole debate. Is that talking about Erev Tchumin or is it talking about Erev Chatzerot? And one of the commentaries there said, can't be talking about Erev Chatzerot. I think it was Tosfot, because Erev Chatzerot has to be with bread. And that's what we're going to see from today's sugya. So right now the Gemara says, but this is word for word. It didn't say there Erev Tchumin. It didn't, right? It doesn't specify all the details, but it's the exact same word. So if we had it there, why do we have it here? So here we're going to quote the Mishnah. That's the Mishnah on Kafav. So Amar Rabba la'afu kemid Rabbi Yoshua. It must be to say that here Rabbi Yoshua disagrees. And there the topic was Erev Tchumen. There was no disagreement. But here we have a dissenting opinion. So because of that, they repeated, right? Generally, we don't repeat the exact same Mishnah, certainly not in the same Masechet. But even within Masechet, right, different Masechtot, sometimes they say, but you already said that somewhere else. Why do you say it here? There, at least a different Masechtot, it's easier to prove. But here it's really problematic. So they say it's to say Rabbi Yeshua disagrees. Da'amal kikar im midachrini lo, right? Because that's what he says. Only bread and only a whole loaf and not anything else. Kamash malan bakol, and that's why they say Rabbi Lezer comes to teach us it's anything. But now we have a problem. Eti Abai questions and says, wait a minute. He quotes a Tannaitic source. This is a bit of a difficult Tannaitic source. One can make an Eruv with anything. Eroof chatzerot. It sounds like you could use anything. But when they said about pat, that you need bread specifically, they were talking about only Eroof chatzerot. And this is a very strange braita. It started off saying you could use anything. And then it switched to saying, well, when it comes to Eroof chatzerot, you only use bread. So, first of all, who's the author of this? Man shamat le da'amar pat im midiachrini lo. Right? So who's the one who says this, that it's only bread? Rabbi Yoshua. And what does it say? V'katane bakol. Okay, so now what does it say there? It says with anything. So now, how did they understand this braita? Okay, they basically understand this braita as saying, bakol ma'arvin is bakol meaning any kind of bread, okay, for Eroof chatzerot, and any kind of anything for shituf mevo'ot. Okay, so now it sounds like Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Rabbi Yeshua about this, and there doesn't seem to be much of a machloket, because even Rabbi Yeshua says bakol. Now, this word bakol doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means, because here it means different kinds of bread. So you can understand that maybe Rabbi Eliezer is talking about different kinds of breads. So Ela Amar Rabba Bar Chana La Fuke Mi Rabbi Yeshua. Okay, again, we're going to say bakol ma'arvin is to say other than Rabbi Yeshua. What's the difference between them now? Da'amar shlema im prusalo kamash malan bakol. We're now going to understand that what we have here in our Mishnah is not what you thought in the beginning, bakol ma'arvin. Bakol ma'arvin actually splits into two, the way we understood from that braita that we just quoted. Bakol means when it comes to Eroof chatzerot, now this goes back, we learned this already. Remember, Eroof chatzerot needs bread. Shituf mevo'ot could be anything. And why is that? Bread unifies the people in the houses. Remember, the whole Eroof chatzerot is to combine. Let's just do a good review of Eroof chatzerot versus shituf mevo'ot. If you didn't get it yet, we'll get it today. Eroof chatzerot combines all the people in their houses in the same courtyard. It's saying, your house is my house. Now, if your house is my house, that means you can eat my bread, because bread is the basic for food in the house. But when it comes to shituf mevo'ot, we're joining people's courtyards. In the courtyards, people don't eat food. Okay, this is like I was talking to someone yesterday. Was talking to me about how, it's so interesting. Like we eat all the time, picnics and outdoors, especially now, right? People eat a lot outside. But in those days, nobody ate food outside in the courtyard. That wasn't a place for food. Maybe you would drink something, but you wouldn't eat food. Like now, people walk on the street. You're in a rush. You eat your sandwich on the way, and there's some people who say, can't eat bread while you're walking. That's disrespectful. And it comes from the Gemara, because nobody did that in those days. That's like, I think it even calls you like a dog eating on the street. But now the whole it's very different culturally. So anyway, the point is that when it comes to Eroof chatzerot, it has to be bread. Even Rabbi Eliezer agrees with that. So when he says bakol, what does he mean? He means bread, any kind of bread, meaning it could be sliced, it could be whole, it doesn't make a difference. Rabbi Yoshua comes to say it has to be whole. And that's why this Mishnah repeats itself, because it's talking about something different. When it comes to shituf mevo'ot, that's bakol mishtatfim, even there everyone will agree anything is okay. And the chutz min hamayim v'hamelach would have to be referring to the shituf mevo'ot and not to the Eroof chatzerot. Again, the pshat of the Mishnah is very difficult here to read that into the Mishnah, because his bakol splits into two. Bakol, when it comes to bread, is any type of bread in any form your bread is in. And bakol, when it comes to shituf, would be any kind of food. So the chutz min hamayim v'hamelach would have to be applying to shituf mevo'ot. So there's definitely some difficulty with this Mishnah, but that's how the Gemara understands it. Now we want to understand, why is it so important? And this is also really interesting. If you take a step back and look from perspective, Why does Rabbi Yehuda want it to, Rabbi Yoshua, sorry, I'm confusing him with later in the Daf, Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yoshua say it has to be whole? So now they're going to say, Uprusa my time alone. Why can't it be a slice of bread? What's wrong with a slice of bread? Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul, Amar Rabbi Mishum Eva. This is a fascinating line. It says, we don't want to create enmity between the people in the courtyard. We don't want, if I give a whole loaf and you give something smaller, right? Then, you give a slice. I'm going to say, what? You give a slice and I give a whole loaf? What's going on here? Now, why do we care so much about this? So first of all, think about the whole concept, and I think it connects with things we saw yesterday. What's the concept of Eroof Chatzerot? It's bringing people together, and it's teaching you that, remember, what happens in Eroof Chatzerot? If one person doesn't join, they mess it up for everybody else in the courtyard. And we talked yesterday, how much can we force someone to be part of the Eroof, right? If to force them to pay for the hotzah, for the lechi and the korah, right? To pay for the expenses. And here we have this concept that we all live together, and what are they teaching you? And it's almost like the opposite of it's the same idea, but with the Gentile. They don't want you with a Gentile because how do they view Chatzerot? This is our interaction. These are the people you learn from. Oil rasha, oil shcheno, right? If you're with a bad neighbor, that affects you badly. Tov l'shchen, tov l'shcheno, right? If you have a good neighbor, it's all about, and if you look at the perspective of Eruvin, it's all about community building. And it's all about this idea that we're in this together. And when we have joint property, we have to share. We have to think about other people. We can't just be selfish. Think, well, I don't want an Eroof, so why should I join? Right? Doesn't affect me for whatever reason, right? I don't want to carry this Shabbat. I'm a home. It's Corona. I'm staying home. I'm not leaving my house, right? So, but I still have to think about the fact that maybe somebody else wants to leave their house and carry their items. So there's always this idea of thinking about the other person, and here it's even taken to the extreme. Well, not even the extreme, but we know this goes on all the time, right? You do a potluck lunch and somebody brings a bottle of water and somebody else makes a lasagna, right? That's not so fair. Like, I brought a lasagna, I worked hard in the kitchen, and you brought a bottle of water. That's not so nice. So in order to create good relations, which is really what this whole idea of Eruvin is about, it's creating good relations and saying, we're together in this. So it's a really nice idea to think about. And I didn't do this, but maybe down the road, the question is, where does Eva come up? In what sources? It comes up a bunch of times in the Gemara that we're trying to prevent bad relationships between people. Be interesting to see if there's some sort of connection between all the places where it appears. Amar le Rav Acha berei de Rava le Rav Ashi. Ervu kulam b'prusa. Now we're going to get into our nitpicky questions. Okay, these are the classic, right? You're a teacher, you're teaching, and the students say, well, what if, right? This happens especially in a Gemara class because the whole Gemara is about what if and what if. So, Ervu kulam b'prusot mahu. What if everybody gave a slice? Well, then there's no issue of mishum eva. They'll come to, get upset one at the other. So amar le shema yachzor davar lekulkulo. It's such an interesting use of words here because it's not like it will go back to shema yachzor davar lekulkulo means maybe it'll go back to the time when it wasn't fixed, when it was messed up. It's not like it's messed up if people give whole loaves, but they're saying that because maybe today everyone's giving a slice, but maybe the next week someone will decide to give a loaf and then they'll get upset at everybody else that they don't, right? You would think maybe the person who decided to give a loaf should know that they're going beyond, but still we all know that sometimes you're happy to do something more than everybody else, but then later you kind of regret it and you're like, why am I working harder than everybody else? And it's, so sometimes you have good intentions, but in the end you end up feeling that same feeling of it's just not fair. Why did I put more than everybody else? So again, it's the Gemara getting into human nature and what the expectations people are going to think. And therefore, since even though today they're all giving slices, maybe at some point they'll give bigger portions or something nicer, and it'll go back to that same struggle between people and people kind of looking askance at others and what they do or don't do. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to continue with some other questions about this, like nitpicky questions. Or I would say not nitpicky, but what if questions. Okay, so what if? Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul, nitzla imenu kedei chalata o kedei dimua. Okay, this is one of two meanings. I'll start with what chala is and what dimua is. So chala is obviously, we know we take a portion of our bread, hafrashat chala, and we give it to the kohen. So what if normally we take it before we bake the bread? What if you forgot and you bake the bread with it in it? And you didn't take it out, you didn't separate it. So what do? You hadn't taken challah at all. So when you take the bread out of the oven and you remember, I forgot to take challah, this has happened to me. So you take a piece off the bread. So what if, that's what it means, kedei chalata, you took a portion of challah. There's two interpretations. One is, what if you actually forgot to take challah and you took a portion off the bread, and now you have a whole loaf, but it's missing a little chunk from the challah. Or if you look at the wording, it says kedei chalata. It might actually mean if a little piece is missing, that would be about the size of challah if you were to take challah. So some people say it means literally that you took challah, and some people think it means that it's the size that if you had taken, it could have been construed as maybe it's challah. Or what's kedei dimua? That's if, again, you have a small part of truma that falls in and it's batel, which would have to be a small, right? It's 1 in 100 is batel, is canceled, nullified in if your truma mixes in. But so let's say you have one portion of truma to 100 of the rest of the dough. You have dough that was truma dough, and then it gets mixed in and you bake it. And now what you have to do is you're allowed to eat it because it's batel, but you have to take out some symbolic amount of truma so you don't benefit from truma. So you take out the one portion, and again, your loaf is missing something. So it's the same exact idea. We'll see, although maybe there's a bit of a difference. So they say, if you took that, ma'arvin loba, you could make an Eroof with that because it's just missing a little bit. And people know, again, whether we're talking about size or whether we're talking about that it was actually dimua or chulin, and then people or chala, and people knew that you were doing it because of a mitzvah or because you needed to, then we'd allow it. The hatanya, but wait a minute, there's a brayta that says kedei dimua ma'arvin loba. It works kedei dimua, yes, but kedei chalata aim arvin loba. By the way, chala is a bigger portion than dimua, so one can see why. That's 1 in 100, and chala is, we're going to see, 1 in 24 or 1 in 48. So here it says kedei chalata aim arvin loba. So how did Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul say you could, and here it says you can't? So they're going to say lo kasha, and here we're going to learn something interesting about hafrashat challah. If you want to learn more about it, also in Daf Michelle Farber in Hebrew this week, they talk about hafrashat challah. Lo kasha ha bechalat nachtom ha bechalat balabayit. And by the way, Shuli Mishkin also in flashback this week, she also talks about challah. The main part of her is really about different kinds of breads, and which is a little bit more connected to further on the daf, but she connects it all in a whole historic perspective on breads and what people use their breads for and where they come up in different halachot, different grains, etc. So that also is worth reading. So now we say, there's a difference between, this is very interesting halacha, I don't know if you know this, how much challah you're supposed to take if you're a baker and how much challah you're supposed to take if you're a regular person just cooking and baking in your house. So here we're going to read it. Ha bechalat nachtom, ha bechalat balabayit. Ditnan, as the Mishnah says, shiur challah echad mi-esrim va'arba'a. It's 1 in 24. Hauseh, for who? Who is it 1 in 24? Hauseh isa la'atzmo, o isa lemishteh beno. Even if you were to make a lot for a party for your son or for yourself, then it's echad mi-esrim va'arba'a. But nachtom, but if you're a baker and you sell your bread, shehu oseh limkor bashuk. Here's very interesting. So either, right, you're a baker, you have a bakery, it sounds like, or a woman who decides to sell her stuff in the shuk. This is interesting. It sounds like she's not a regular seller. This is very classic. Now I get this all the time now. I keep getting these WhatsApps about women who are cooking in their houses and selling, all these people who don't have jobs. And they figure, oh, I cook in my house and people are looking, right? There's no restaurants open and I may as well, or, there are some, but not as many as usual. And, let me start cooking and selling stuff that, selling my stuff. I saw it last week, especially with Parshat Noach, people were selling these rainbow challahs and all sorts of interesting things. So that would be the situation. If she's doing it limkor bashuk, then she becomes like a nachtom, and then it's echad me'arba'im b'shmona. Now, why is there a difference? They take less. Why do they take less? So one option could be that we want to say, well, we're trying to be good to store owners, right? It's like labor laws, right? We want to protect the store owner and not have to have them take so much. But the answers given are not exactly that, at least what I saw. Maybe somebody says that. But the difference is, so first of all, one interesting answer I saw, it's not the typical, but I want to mention it first, that people in their own house are generally stingy. Right? This is my stuff. I made this for my house. And because the rabbis are worried they're going to be stingy, they make the shiur greater so that in case they stint a little bit and they don't give as much as they're supposed to, at least they'll have given the minimum. It's a little hard to understand that because they actually double the amount. That's a big change. It's not like a small change. But the other option given is that you want to give a gift to a kohen. It's called matnot kiunat. That's right. You ever think about this when you do hafrashat challah in your house? Nowadays, we don't give it to the kohen. We burn it in the oven. Now, think about the amount that we take. It's very small. If I gave that to a Kohen, that's what the Kohen gets, a little round, nothing, that's not a gift. So if I'm doing it in my house, I have to give something more significant so that it actually is something of significance. If I'm a baker and I'm baking a lot of challah or a lot of bread, then if I take 1 in 48 from the whole thing, I'll end up with something that looks reasonable and that's respectful to give to the Kohen. So therefore, the baker who's baking a lot, okay, now, then what about if you're doing mishteh beno? Why does it not change? That's very easy because we don't distinguish. Once we make a halacha, it's either you're a private individual or you're a seller. So when you're a seller, you're a seller. When you're a private individual, you're a private individual, even if you're making it for your son's wedding or something. Okay, next. So now, what did this do for us? This resolved. One time it said you can use it for Eruvin. The other one said you can't. It depends how much you took off. If you took off 1 in 48, like the baker, then you can use it for Eroof. If you took off 1 in 24, because you're an individual, that already is not respectful. You can't use that for Eroof. Amar Chista, another kind of what if. You have slices. According to Rabbi Yeshua, you can't use slices. It has to be whole. So what if tifara b'kisam? What if you took a wood chip and you kind of sewed it together with a wood chip? You kind of connected the two broken pieces. Ma'arvin loba, he says you can make an Eroof with it then because it looks whole. So now they say, just like we keep asking before, someone says halacha, and then we say, but there's a braita that says otherwise. V'hatanya, ein marvin loba, you can't make an Eroof. So lo kashya had yediyah tifra, ha de lo yediyah tifra. It all depends on, is it noticeable or not? If it's not noticeable, then go for it, because the whole idea is mishum evav. No one's going to really notice that you sewed it together, then it's fine. Obviously, I'm not exactly sure how you do this, and when they bite into it, they'll eat a wood chip. I'm not sure what the reality is here, but if it's not so noticeably different, then it's fine. But if it's noticeably different, then everyone's going to start saying, oh, why'd you put 2 slices and stick them together like that? Not so nice. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Shmuel. Now we're going to get into, as I mentioned, the Chuli talks about these different types of breads. So ma'arvin bepat ores ubepat dochan. Where is this? We're the most familiar with rice in the Gemara in Kitniot Sugya, okay, about Pesach. What can you make your bread with on Pesach, your matzah? Matzah can only be made from one of the 5 grains, and rice is not one of the 5 grains. But here we see, right, the whole Kitniot thing. Where did that come from? So nobody really knows. But it's something that developed sometime around, right, the first time we really hear about it is the late 1200s. And they say, one of the reasons they give when they see the minhag, the Ashkenazim aren't eating Kitniot, they say, they don't say Ashkenazim, they're just talking about the people in their communities, are not eating Kitniot. They say, well, maybe it's because people made bread out of it, or what they call ma'aseh k'derah. They make kugels with it, or quiches, or they use it to stick things together just like bread, and it's similar. So here you see, what if you made bread out of rice or bread out of millet? So he says, you can use that for Eroof. That's what Shmuel says. Rabbi Zera quotes on the name of Shmuel. So now, Amar Mar Ukva, Ledidi Mefarsh Leminei Demar Shmuel, Bepat Ores Marvin, Bepat Dochan E Marvin. So Mar Ukva has a different opinion. He says, I heard from Shmuel differently than you. I heard that rice bread, yes, but not millet bread. That's not respectful enough. Amar of Chia Ba'avin Amarav, Marvin Bepat Adashim. We have another halacha. You can use lentil bread. And for here, we're going to get on an interesting tangent. So the Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? In the time of Shmuel, there was someone had lentil bread. Right? I feel like I'm in a vegan daf here, right? All these different random breads. In fact, they're going to talk. Well, I'll get to it in a minute. But shadye lekalbe, he threw it to his dog. Velo achla, and the dog even wouldn't eat the lentil bread. Now, anything, this all reminds us also of Pesach. All this stuff, it's not chametz if it's not ra'oi la'achila kelev, right? Even a dog won't eat it, and you don't have to worry about it. So here you had this bread that even a dog wouldn't eat. So how on earth could you use it for your Eroof? So they answer the story you must have gotten wrong. Maybe it had lentils in it, but it was a mix of all kinds of things. There were lentils in it. There were other kinds of grains. It was a mixed bread, which nowadays, right, you go to these fancy bakeries and you see they've mixed tons of different grains, right? 7-grain bread is considered the best. Anyway, here it's looked at it's really frowned upon, which makes sense. The last time, right, we've seen before how whole wheat bread was considered bad, right? They had a different understanding of nutrition than we do. And here he's going to quote from a verse in Yechezkel, okay? Dichtiv. And this is, by the way, the source for, I don't know if you've seen this before, but a few people sent it to me, and Shuli has a picture of it on her post and the article today about Ezekiel bread. There's something called Ezekiel bread, which is made from all different grains. We're going to see that certainly in Yechezkel, it was not looked at as a good thing. Okay, and certainly from the sugya. So, dichtiv ata kach l'chach kitinu seurin uful v'adashim b'dochan kosmin. If you've ever learned Yechezkel, you know that he's asked to do all sorts of bizarre things. So this is one of them. He's supposed to make bread from all different kinds of grains, and it's to show how bad things are going to be in the destruction. Now, what's bad about it? It's very obvious. Right, why would you ever do that in their day? Because you didn't have enough of any one thing, right? That's what happens when there's destruction. You're at a loss. You kind of gather whatever you can get and you make a bread out of whatever you can do, right? It's like a classic, I don't have anything to eat. Let's just put a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and let's put it together. That's really not necessarily, the best thing to be eating. So now it becomes a little unclear where the Gemara is going with this. So at this point, they say, it must be that bread that Shmuel threw out was like an Ezekiel bread, but the bread, regular padatashim, is fine, okay? But Rav Papa says, and now some people think that this is coming to explain, I'm going to just say it the way I think the pshat is. I'm not going to say there's other interpretations, okay? If you look, you might see some other interpretation, but I'm going to read it like this, which according to my reading, the downside is it kind of leaves things a little bit open, but I think it makes the most sense. So they say, Amar Papa Amar, Hahit sluya b'tzoat adam havai. No, that bread, what made the Ezekiel bread disgusting? Not necessarily that it was made up of all these things, or maybe it was because of that, but it was also disgusting. And this is the real gross part. And I'm certain that Ezekiel bread is not done in this way, but in the psukim there in Yechezkel, it says it was roasted on so'at adam, excrement of human excrement. They used that to burn the fire, and that's what made it really disgusting. It wasn't necessarily that it was all these different minim, which then would kind of reject our answer for Shmuel, and then we're a little bit stuck. But how do we know, right? Because it says, adam to agena, sorry, and prepare it in front of everybody with so'at adam. You could say it was both. It was disgusting because it was, right, it also showed they had nothing. And then not only did they have nothing to make it with, but they had nothing to roast it, right? They had nothing to make a fire with. They had to use human excrement. So now they say, once we're on these psukim, they want to understand the beginning of that verse with the glalim. The glalim is the excrement. My ve'ugat se'orim tochlena. You're going to eat it like a cake of barley. Amar Rav Chisda lishiurim. What's another thing about this? You're going to eat it in parts, meaning you're going to ration your food. This is what you do when time of destruction, you eat a little portion today, a little portion tomorrow. You measure everything you're eating. So they make a play on words, se'orim and shiurim. Okay, even though shin and sin are different, but right, for these purposes, we can play with them. Rav Papa Amar, he gives a different explanation. The way you make it is like barley bread and not like wheat bread. There's different explanations what this means, but basically people didn't generally make barley bread. So because of that, and we've seen before, barley bread gives you stomach aches. It's not good for you. The point is, when you make regular bread, since that's what you make all the time, you make it really nice and it looks nice and it's in these nice forms. But barley bread, they would just kind of stick together if you were going to make it. Nobody really made it in nice shapes, or maybe some other interpretation about something about it, but it's not nicely done like wheat bread. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. And here, really, this sugya could be a whole sugya in Bava Metzia, which is all about laws of kinyanim and how not the whole Masechet, but parts of the Masechet talk about how we acquire items. And there's a whole parak about, in what way do we acquire items? Now, when we go to a store, we pay money, right? Here's a good question. I'll kind of throw it at you. You order something from Amazon. Now, at that point, you've paid your money. Okay. Again, maybe it's a question when exactly they charge you, but let's say you paid your money, you've given your credit card. They probably charge you right then. I actually don't even know if they charge you right away or not, but let's say they charge you right then. So you've purchased it. Now, what if on the way to you, something happens to it? Okay. Who's responsible? Who owns it at that point? So in fact, you might think I pay money, I've already acquired it, but not really, because in that case, if something happens, I'm going to call Amazon and say, hey, I didn't get my package, and they're going to deliver it to me, right? They're going to say, you're right, we're responsible. Until it gets to me, I'm actually not responsible. So that's basically saying, ma'ot enam konot. Money does not, I haven't acquired it yet. So if I pay money and I don't get the item right away, right, when do I become the owner and assume responsibility? When I do a kinyan, I pull it, I lift it up, right? I do some sort of act of acquiring. So that's going to be part of the basis of this sugya. But there's a whole debate, and I'll mention it now. We're going to get to it later about whether by Torah law, it's true that money doesn't acquire, and the rabbis went with that. Or maybe some people think by Torah law, money really does acquire. But the rabbis said it doesn't because they were worried about some other reason, which we'll get to. Okay, so there's a big debate about if by Torah law, maybe money really does call you the owner, but the rabbis changed it, or maybe by Torah law, even by Torah law, no, you can't acquire anything by money. So let's say, now this is a let's say, this isn't, the Mishnah isn't telling you this is what you should do. The Mishnah is saying, if you were to do this, what would be the halacha? Normally, somebody can go and say, I'm putting down food for the Sheet of Mavo. What did we say yesterday? That he puts it down. He has to kind of tell people, right? But he puts the money, right? He puts the food down for everybody. And he's mizakeh lehem. Remember, all yidei bano b'tov haktani. So now, the Mishnah says, Noten adam me'alachem vani u'linachtom. If I give my money, I give some money to a store owner who lives in my courtyard. He shares a mavoi with me, okay, the alley. And I say, I'm giving you money. Now, you don't have to give money. Remember, someone could just kind of take the food, put it down and say, I'm doing this for everybody. But here, I gave him money and said, I want to buy my rights to the Eroof, to the food. Kadesh yizakelo Eroof. And I say, I want you, by this money I'm giving you, to then when you go put down the food, say, I'm going to be mizakeh, right? They'll say they're going to basically give me rights to it, which they're going to do for everybody, but I want to buy those rights. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, this works. Different Rabbi Eliezer. So notain here doesn't mean you should do this. It means if you did this, it works. This doesn't work. Okay, if you look at Rashi there, the last Rashi on the page, on Amud Aleph, he says it doesn't work. Why? Because ein ma'ot konot ad shimshoch. I never acquired any food here. I put down money, but I never had any contact with that food. If I don't have contact with the food, I didn't acquire it. And what I said is, I only want to be part of the shituf. This is the way the Chachamim read it. If I can acquire it, I don't want you to do it for free. I want to pay my way, but you didn't really pay your way. It's kind of weird here because you did pay your way, but you didn't actually acquire it, so it never became yours. And if you wanted the zichiyah to be done through a kinyan, because you said I'm buying it, right? Then, or you kind of gave him money, which shows that you want. Then, if he goes and puts on the sheet of mizakeh, everyone else in the mavoi, you're not going to be included because it wasn't done the way you were interested in it being done. Okay, now you could say, I was just making you a shaliach, and we're going to see later that it all depends on how you worded it. If I said zakeli, then I meant I wanted actually some sort of kinyan here, and I didn't get it according to the rabbis. Again, Rabbi Eliezer thinks it's okay, but the rabbis think that you're missing something here. Okay, so we'll discuss this more as we get to it in the Gemara. However, modim b'shar kol adam shezachu lo ma'otav. But if I did this with you, who's living in my courtyard or my mavo in my alley, and you're not a store owner, you're just a regular person, and I said, I'm giving you money to be mizakeli when you put down whatever food you put down, then I'm obviously making you my messenger, and then it's fine. It's only because I went to a store owner. Then it becomes an issue, okay? Because I went to a store owner, that changes everything. The assumption is I really wanted a kinyan, like some sort of formal thing, which I'm missing according to the rabbis. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's okay anyway. But because of that, we say, okay, that's what you need. This next line in the Mishnah isn't so clear whether we're starting something new or it's really a continuation. So I'll read it as if it's a continuation, which is the way most people read it, but just know that some people think this is something new. She'ein ma'arvim la'adam ela midato. So let's just assume that this explains the rabbis. The rabbis say a zichiyah has to be done with the person's knowledge. And it wasn't done the way I wanted it done, because I wanted it done as in a way that I owned a share of it. And I never owned a share of it because I never did. I never moved it into my possession. I never did a mashicha, did some sort of handkerchief, kinyan, something, nothing. So that's what explains the rabbis. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, which seems like he's disagreeing, although we'll see it's not so clear he disagrees. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, b'med dvarim amurim. This is all be'eruvei tchumi. אבל בעירובי חצרות מערבים לדעתו ושלא לדעתו, לפי שזכין לאדם שלא בפניו, ואין חבים לאדם שלא בפניו. This we quoted yesterday, which is that his approach is no. When it comes to Eruv Tchumin, it's not necessarily good for me that you put down an Eruv without me knowing, because remember what happens. I live here. You put my Eruv there. That means I can't go, right? I'm not allowed 2,000 cubits from where you put it, not from where I am right now. So maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want to go the other way. But Eruv Chatzerot is only for my benefit. It means I could carry. Of course, it's good for me. So that's what he says. He says when it comes to, and there's this concept that we've seen a number of times already, I can do something for someone else if it's fully in their best interest. And this is in their best interest because now they can carry. And we'll see later, the Eruv Chatzerot splits into two really. There's two kinds. One kind is helpful, one kind is not necessarily helpful. We talked about this before also. If my courtyard opens up into only one alley, and that's the one we're talking about, then obviously it's beneficial. Now I can carry more than I was able to otherwise. But if I have two exits to my chatzer, my courtyard, and you're joining me in one, that means I'm joining in one and not the other, and maybe that's not for my benefit, okay? Because you're saying this is your exit for Shabbat. Maybe I want to go the other way. So therefore, it depends. It's not always necessarily for your benefit. Okay, so now we're going to start with the Gemara. By the way, Gefet is very interesting this week. It's all about this idea of kinyanim and this big Tosfot about it that they go into. So if you want to listen to Gefet in Hebrew, it's all more in depth about this idea of kinyanim. Okay, my time of Rabbi Eliezer. So what's the reason for Rabbi Eliezer? Why does he think this is okay? Halo mashach. It really shouldn't be okay. He never did any sort of kinyan. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua, Asa'o Rabbi Eliezer ka'arba'a prakim b'shana. He said this is an exception, like in another exception to the rule, and we'll see what this is. Ditnan, okay, arba'a prakim b'shana means 4 times a year. We're going to see what this is. As it says in the following Mishnah, Ba'arba'a prakim elu mashchitim et hatabach ba'al korcho. Afilu shor shava 1,000 dinar, ve'en lelokech ele dinar echad, kofin oto lishchot. Generally, your money doesn't acquire you. We talked about that before, but in one particular situation it does, and we're basically going to say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, likewise in ours. What's the situation? There's 4 times a year. Rashi explains to us, Ba'arba'a prakim elu, the second Rashi on the Gemara. He says it's Erev, Erev Yom Tov of Pesach, Erev Yom Tov of Shavuot, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Tov Acharon Shel Sukkot. I'm not sure why specifically. I don't remember the sugya there. It's in Chulin. I forgot already why specifically it's the last day of Sukkot and not the first day. And Erev Yom Kippurim B'Galil. Someone adds a 5th. It's also Erev Yom Kippur because there's a mitzvah to eat. These are all days where people want to eat big meals. If that's the case. If I normally go to a shochet and I give him money and say, I want you to slaughter me, it's really up to the slaughterer. He doesn't have to. And, because maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe he doesn't want to slaughter. Let's say I want a piece of meat that's worth a dinar. That's what it says in the Gemara. And he has a shore that's worth 1,000 dinarim. So if he slaughters that ox, now I take one little piece, he's going to be stuck with the rest of it. He could say, no, thank you, right? All I did was give him money. There's no actually acquiring yet done. But when it comes to these 4 days, it's clear that I'm serious and that I'm going to take it. And because of the need for meat that day, we can force him to do it. But as soon as I pay the money, it basically becomes mine. That's the flip side. It's that I now own this part of the animal because I gave the money. So now we're going to say in this case, imet la lokeach. And because of that, if the animal were to die before he slaughters it, it's my loss. I already paid him the dinar. I lose my money. He doesn't have to shecht another animal. Normally, it's like the Amazon thing. He would have to shecht another animal. This is an exception to the rule where we say ma'ot kono, which means the responsibility is all on me, the buyer. So they say, right, med alokeach halo mashach, but you didn't do mashicha. How could this work? It doesn't make any sense. So amar Rafuna b'shem mashach. Oh, no, you must have done mashicha. So now the Gemara says, that makes no sense because look at the continuation of that Mishnah. What does it say at the end of the Mishnah? Bishar yemot hashana eino kain, but other days of the year, it's not the case. On a regular day, it would be the opposite. The responsibility would be on the shochet. So if it died, then he would be responsible. The slaughterer would be responsible to provide a different animal. So if you're going to say the whole thing is when I did a mashicha, I did an actual kinyan, that wouldn't be the case on other days of the year. Amai hamashach. So Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak laolam b'shem mashach. B'shalom mashach. It must be I didn't do mashicha. So what could it be then? And now we're going to get how it compares to our case. It must be that now ma'ot really don't acquire, okay? But I gave you money, and what did the shochet do? He went to someone right next to him. I wasn't there anymore. And he said, listen, I want to give you rights to this animal on behalf of that person, okay? Now, in a normal day, he can't do that. Why? Because maybe I'll change my mind and I won't want the meat. Now, you might say that's a little unfair. You paid money, but in those world, right? It wasn't. You didn't do a kinyan. You were basically allowed to change your mind. So if he did that, it wouldn't necessarily be for my benefit because maybe I'll change my mind. I don't want to eat meat that day. But But in those days, it's clear you want the meat, and therefore it's a clear zchut. You clearly want it because you want a big meal. Therefore, zachin lo shelo b'fanav. Okay, therefore he can do that. He can do the zichiyah when you're not there, as it benefits you. But on other days, it's not necessarily in your best interest because, again, the animal might die. So I don't want to acquire it so early, and I didn't do any sort of kinyan on my own. So therefore, since I didn't do a kinyan on my own, you can't be mizak as somebody else, right? If you're the slaughterer. Therefore, ein chavin lo ela b'fanav. So therefore, we could say the same thing here. Here, we're going to say, since it's zchutulo, that's why Rabbi Eliezer thinks it's better for you to have the eruv. Therefore, he can do zechiyah, even though it's not exactly the way. It's tricky here because it is mida'atcha. You said you want to be part of the eruv, but you said, I want to do it in a way where I purchase it. And you didn't really purchase it. Even though you gave the money, you didn't do any sort of kinyan. So you're missing something here. Different explanation of arba prakim. V'Rav Ilam Rabbi Yochanan ba'arba prakim elu ha'emidu chachamim divrehen al divrei Torah. Ta'amar Rabbi Yochanan dvar Torah ma'ot konot. He says in the Arba Prakim, they made an exception. Why did they make an exception? Because what's the problem? If we didn't make that exception to the rule, what would happen? People wouldn't slaughter animals. They'd say, I'm going to have a financial loss. I don't want to slaughter. You want this animal? But then people weren't going to have meat. So they basically forced the slaughterers into doing this. And then the slaughterers can basically say, fine, you're making me do this, but I'm going to be mizakeh someone else. And this is, well, the truth is you don't even have to do zechiyah, actually, right? It would just be that they would automatically acquire it by buying it by the money, okay? And that means ma'ot konot, and that's according to Rabbi Yochanan, from a Torah perspective, ma'ot konot. Since ma'ot konot from a Torah perspective, once in a while we can make an exception and go back to Torah law. Now, why did the rabbis change this? Very interesting. They said, I have to do Mashicha. Why? Let's say this is like Amazon, right? I pay the money where I'm not protected at all, right? What if you leave the chitim that I bought in your aliyah? Now, if they become mine immediately, let's say there's a fire in your house, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to save important things to you and you're going to ignore my stuff. So you're going to say, well, they belong to Michelle, who cares, right? If they burn, they burn. It's her loss. So because we don't want you being reckless about my stuff, we say, until I get it, it's not mine. And that makes you responsible for them. So that's a rabbinic thing. That's not Torah law. Torah law really I did. But the rabbi said, this is like Mishum Eva, right? We want to create good relationships and that, right? Why does Amazon do that? And I was thinking specifically Amazon, because if you go to Israel, it's not always such a service-oriented industry, but right, it's service-oriented. We want to make people happy and make the system work. So that's why the rabbis instituted it. Okay, continuing, modim b'shar kol adam. So now it's said in the Mishnah, and I already told you what shar kol adam, but the Gemara doesn't know yet what it is. Man shar kol adam, which we said, it works if you pay them money and say, even though you didn't do a kinyan, because there we know that you didn't, all you really meant was, I want to make you a shaliach. So Amarav balabayit. He says it means a balabayit. V'chein Amar Shmuel also said balabayit. Amar Shmuel lo shanu ela nachtom. Here he says explicitly, the Mishnah was only talking about a nachtom, the first part. Aval balabayit koneh. Amar Shmuel lo shanu ela me'ah. Another few limitations Shmuel says. It's only if you put money. Aval kli, but if you used a utensil for purchasing, then that would be called a kinyan, and then it would be koneh. And finally, another one Shmuel says, Amar Shmuel lo shanu ela de amar lo zecheli. This is where I said the wording is very important. If you say zakeli, I want you to give me rights, right? I want you to kind of transfer me some ownership of it. Then it doesn't work. Aval amar arevli, but if you say make an eruv for me, that's already a language of shaliach shavye v'kani, right? Nowadays, we're very careful about what language we choose to speak, right? Politically correct, all that. Here also, they're saying it's all about your language. This means shaliach. This means kinyan, and you didn't do a kinyan, you didn't finish your kinyan, so it's not going to work. But if you say arevli, then it'll work. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, b'mei dvarim omrim. Now we have Rabbi Yehuda who says this is only, right, an eruv tchumim, but eruv chatzero, clearly it will work because they can always do zechiyah even if you're not there. So the question, so Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halakha ki Rabbi Yehuda. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda that this actually, you can do zechim basically against Tanakam, against Chachamim. And not only that, right? I'll say everywhere in Eruvin we paskin like him. So we're gonna have a few questions on this. Amalei Rav Chana Bagdat Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Shmuel afilu b'mavoy shenitlu korotav lechayav. if you have a mavoi that started out on Shabbat with a mavoi, with a lechi and a kohen, and then it got taken down. So would that work? And will we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda there that's okay? So Amarle be'eruvin amarti lecha v'lo b'mechitza. No, I said Eruvin. I didn't say mechitza. Now there's a mechitza for Eruvin, but mechitza is something that is a broad topic. There we don't necessarily paskin like Rabbi Yehuda because it has ramifications for Eruvin, but it's a broad topic that applies in other cases also, and therefore no. Amarle Rav Acha berei de Rav Ashi halacha bichlal de plige. So wait, halacha. It sounds like if we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, that means he disagrees with Tanakama. But didn't Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi say, Hamar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol makom shamar Rabbi Yehuda ematai ubameh b'mishnatenu, eno ele lefaresh divrei chachamim, which means that they're just, every time those words are used, Rabbi Yeshua has a klal, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, every time he uses those words, it means it's to explain and not to argue. But didn't we learn nitosfu alehem mosifu mizakevet tzarich lodia? So wait a minute. How could you say he doesn't disagree? Didn't we already learn in the previous Mishnah that you have to tell them? Hata, right? And therefore, it sounds like you can't do zachin in Eroof chatzerot, which means there is a disagreement. So it's very confusing. Is there a disagreement? Is there not a disagreement? So they say, oh no. You could say there, the previous Mishnah was hatam b'chatzer sheben shnei b'vo. That's the distinction I keep making. There where it's not clear maybe whether it's good for you or not because your courtyard exits into two different places. Last question. V'hamar of Shizbi Amar of Chista. But wait, you can't say that Mishnah wasn't disagreeing with Rabbi Yehuda because that's exactly what we said yesterday. Rav Shizbi said, Zot omerech chalukin alav al chaverav shel Rabbi Yehuda. And that's where I started today. I reminded you of that. He says the rabbis disagree with him. So we have Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi who says Rabbi Yehuda, whenever he says ematai or bamed dvarim amurim, he is agreeing, he's explaining the rabbis, versus Shmuel who said we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, which sounds like they disagree. So they say, oh, Gavra karami, marsavar pligi, or marsavar lo pligi. That means don't question Shmuel from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Those are two Amoraim. It's not like you have a Tana who disagrees. That's always the rule. Two Amoraim, so they both have two different approaches, and that's okay. We're okay with different approaches. It's always a problem if they disagree with a Tana, but if they disagree with another Amora, one thinks they disagree, one thinks they don't disagree, and we'll end with that for today. Have a great day, everybody.